now call upon our second speaker, Dr. Manjunath Prabhu, our beloved Head of Department of Anesthesiology, KMC Manipal, to brief us on another vital system, the renal physiology. Dr. Manjunath Prabhu has more than 25 years of teaching experience in the field of anesthesia. His areas of interest include regional anesthesia, difficult airway, pain management, and pediatric anesthesia. He is not only an astute clinician and a passionate teacher, but above all, he is a leader par excellence. His enthusiasm for the subject is the one thing which is more effective than the recent viral pandemic. Over to you, sir.
Good evening. Thank you, Deepika. I will also try the screen sharing. And thank you, Tushar. Also, I would like to thank the two gentlemen who are controlling all this. That is our Ajit and Amrit and their team. Thank you. Now, my slides are visible?
Yes, sir, you're visible, sir.
Okay. Yes. Greetings from Manipal and good evening to everybody. I will be talking to you on now renal physiology. As most of the other systems are covered, this is the one more system which is important as an anesthetist or even to the patient because it does many things. And at the same time, any problem with this system, we have got a lot of buffer to manage this, or to some extent, we should be very careful not to actually worsen the condition or worsen the problem. That is why we should know our kidney, the physiology. If you know the physiology, it's much easier to go on to the what is happening, what we should be doing. I'll concentrate mainly on the physiology, and then we will have a couple of cases where I'll see what could be the problem and how we can decide on that. So renal physiology is the topic now. So in this, what I will be looking at is mainly the renal blood flow and unique renal vasculature. This is one of the most important things we should understand for many reasons. Then the autoregulation of kidney and the GFR, how it is controlled. Then tubular reabsorption and secretion. This is the one which does havoc in some times, certain times. Handling the sugar, potassium, and to some extent hydrogen ion. Why I'm saying is, these are the very important thing. Every time you have a hyperglycemic patient, hypoglycemia, or every time you have a potassium high patient, or you have a acidosis, alkalosis, this kind of problem. So we'll just look at that, just touch upon that. And the action of diuretics. We give diuretics left and right. And many a times, like my previous speaker, Dr. Venkatesh, would have given probably in grams. I'm talking about mannitol. So because of this, we should know how they act and where they act. Coming to the kidney, if you look at the renal, the blood vessels, you see a small kidney, 125 to 130 grams each side, and it gets about 1 liter of blood flow per minute. So that means 20% of the cardiac output is going to the kidney. And then if you look at the oxygen extraction, it is only 1.5 ml per deciliter. Normally it is 5 ml per deciliter. Maybe a little more in the heart. But here it is only 1.5. In other words, what it says is this blood flow is not for oxygenation. This blood flow for some other work, like for the clearance, cleaning, excretion. That is the important part we should know. At the same time, even if you look at this particular vascular tree, the medulla, which gets big vessels, but then it gets very little blood. Medulla receives only 5 to 6% of the flow from the cortex. Very little. It is kept like that for certain reasons. And then Oxygen tension in medulla is 8 millimeters of mercury. Imagine it's kind of a hypoxic, less perfused medulla is there when a lot of blood is going around. It is like highway is going around, but nothing is coming, no road is coming to your house. That's how it is. Now we'll come to uniqueness of renal vasculature. We have afferent arterioles, glomerulus, and then efferent arterioles. This is something new. We have the afferent arterioles coming here, the capillaries will be coming, then efferent arterioles. Usually, after the capillaries, it's only veins. Here it is arterioles. There are a couple of reasons for it. I will keep mentioning that when I come to that particular area. Then these capillaries, from there, blood will be going with vasa recta and other things towards the peritubular, and capillary network is there in peritubular also. So this means that there is a peritubular network which will make the low pressure area, and then it will go to veins. So glomerulus, one set of capillaries, then another arterioles, another set of capillaries, and then goes to vein. So that is the one of the major difference compared to any of the other highly perfused organs. This is a indoor fountain. I think you all have seen this picture on the first day when Professor Ramkumar was discussing about airway resistance, airway pressure, oxygen cascade. Now I have brought in here for something else. Look at this pressure drop. This is the, suppose if this is the renal artery pressure, 100 millimeters of mercury, suppose we say it is a mean artery pressure or something like that, then look at the vascular pressure coming down in the afferent arteriole. It is coming to something like 50 or 60 maybe. Then there is a one more steep drop. That is because it is, when it goes to the peritubular capillary, pressure is really low. That means the purpose of each capillary bed is different. When it comes to the glomerular, it is for filtration. So you should have a higher pressure. When it comes to tubular, it is for reabsorption. So it requires lower pressure. So pressure gradient favors filtration. Later, same pressure gradient favors the absorption. That is what is the uniqueness of this, and how the resistance is changing, and how this is making the difference. So glomerular capillaries are higher pressure for filtration, and peritubular capillaries are lower pressure for absorption. Now we will just look at this example. See, this is a table where it is showing glomerular capillary pressure in millimeters of mercury. Afferent end of the glomerulus is 60 millimeters of mercury. And then when arterial pressure is normal, I have indicated by this flat line, it is 60 millimeters of mercury. Oncotic pressure by albumin is 29 millimeters of mercury. Bowman's capsular hydrostatic pressure, that is the pressure against which this filtrate has to go, that is 15 millimeters of mercury. So net filtration pressure is 16 millimeters of mercury. In other words, the pressures for and against filtration equate to 16 millimeters of mercury. Let us think of a situation where arterial pressure has gone up by 10 millimeters of mercury, very little, 10 millimeters of mercury, 70 millimeters is the pressure. Now look at the equation. 29 remains same, 15 remains same, 26 is the net filtration pressure, which is 60% above the previous filtration pressure. What does this say? By little change in the hydrostatic pressure or blood pressure, there is a major change in the filtration pressure. That means you will be drained of fluid totally when blood pressure goes up. But how does kidney manage this? This is one of the important paper which has been reported many times by Shipley and study. The second author is study there. So interesting thing is they have seen in a kind of a dogs, they have perfused their dog kidney and they have checked the renal flow. They have also checked the filtration, and they have also checked denervation. After that, what happens? Very interesting fact they have seen is from a pressure of 80 or 70 millimeters of mercury up to 170 or 180 millimeters of mercury, there is absolutely very little change as far as renal blood flow is concerned, or for that matter, glomerular filtration is concerned. So this is what they have called and what has been told as a auto-regulation or range for auto-regulation. This is one of the earliest study where they have seen this is a perfusion pressure, what they have seen. Now let us see one patient, 28-year-old man brought to the hospital following a polytrauma, pelvis fracture, long bone fracture, a lot of blood is lost, he is looking pale, he is having rapid respiration, pulse is very fast, and he has got very little urine output also, no surprise. So in this situation, if you look at it, the vital organs, the heart, the kidney, the heart, brain, all these are taking most of the blood supply. The center is saying, okay, all the blood is diverted to the heart and say brain. What about poor kidney, which has got a lot of blood supply? That is not receiving. So poor kidney has to decide what to do on its own sometimes. So that is what happens. If you go to the calculation of this in this particular patient, if you do, see the pressure drops here, filtration pressure will drop unless there is a auto-regulation which occurs externally by catecholamine release or something like that. But whereas in this particular patient, catecholamine release is going to help mostly the other vital structures like heart and brain, not for the kidney. Kidney, they will say stand by, you can hold on for some more time. So it has to do a mechanism by which it itself protects. Now, renal blood flow is regulated between 80 to 180 millimeters of mercury. Values might change a little bit here and there. There are two mechanisms. One is response to arterial pressure changes, which occurs all throughout with the sympathetic stimulation and things like that. Second is response to sodium chloride and juxtaglomerular apparatus. This is something different. This is something new for the kidney. This is how kidney is taking care of itself. The center is not looking after me. Kidney is taking care of itself. Now just look at this example. This particular glomeruli is like this. You have got afferent which is little thicker, efferent which is little thinner. There is a capillary tuft there, and there is a filtration pressure. What happens if the filtration pressure increases in case, say for example, if there is a perfusion pressure decreases? What the kidney does is the efferent arteriole, EFF, efferent arterioles will constrict. That will create more pressure. What I mean to say is that will neutralize, bring back the pressure into the glomerular capillary, and that is how filtration pressure is maintained. Now let us see another situation where sympathetic stimulus is there and afferent arteriole are constricted. Okay, then filtration pressure will come down. Okay, but then there is other mechanism also for this. What I mean to say is there is a dilatation can occur at the efferent and dilatation can occur at the afferent also. That mechanism is also there as far as the kidney is concerned. There are, that way kidney is a wonderful organ which has got multiple things, many kind of mechanisms, which is very nice to study the physiology of kidney. Now here I want to bring in the juxtaglomerular apparatus. This is the one which are, you can say, sodium sensitive one. They will start sensing if there is a sodium is low and perfusion pressure is low. Both ways they will start sensing. If perfusion pressure is low, the granular cells here, they will start releasing renin. We will see how renin acts in different areas, what it does. And if you see, this is the duct loop of Henle, ascending loop of Henle. The concentration of sodium and chloride there, that will determine what will happen to this particular macula densa cells, whether they are going to stimulate these granular cells to release renin or not. So that is the other mechanism. So you have a pressure receptor in the arterioles, afferent arterioles, and you have a chemoreceptors in the duct or periductal chemoreceptor like macula densa cells. These are the two together will bring about the whatever changes that is required. Now, I've just mentioned that granular cells are going to release the renin. Let me put it in perspective what renin will do subsequently. Now here, once renin is released, you can see here, the angiotensinogen is it is produced in the liver, then that is converted into angiotensin 1. This is the initial reaction which is triggering the next steps. Without renin, angiotensinogen will be going around without any work. Once renin is coming, angiotensin 1 is converted. Then it quickly goes to the lungs. There, the angiotensin converting enzyme, AC enzyme. We are all very familiar with AC inhibitors. That enzyme will be activated and it converts angiotensin 2, which is very potent drug. This will work on kidney. This will work on kidney tubules. It increases aldosterone secretions. It increases, first of all, it increases sympathetic stimulation here. You can see that. That will increase the blood pressure. Then it will go to the tubular cells. There, it will increase the water and potassium. Potassium increases the excretion. Sodium chloride absorption is increased and water retention occurs. So trying to bring back the volume, trying to bring back the blood pressure. Then from the adrenal cortex again, aldosterone is released. That is going to bring about again the changes there. Then anterior pituitary, antidiuretic hormone, or what is called as AVP, that has been released. Again, that is going to bring about more collecting duct water absorption and again distal convoluted tubular water absorption. So this way, it is going to restore, try to restore the volume, try to restore the pressure and get the good perfusion pressure. So you can see there are so many actions once it is converted to angiotensin 2. Suppose angiotensin 1 or angiotensinogen has got very little work. Renin is required initially. AC is there, but renin is required to convert it. Excuse me. Yeah. We will see what is the action of renin on the, angiotensin 2 on the kidney, brings about renal artery and afferent arterial constriction, vasoconstriction in the efferent. Remember, there is one extra plus is there. That means it is little more than afferent. That means filtration pressure is brought up little more there. Then it reduces the filtration area. Mesangial cells are there in between the capillary tuft there. They will be contracting, rather they will be dilating, and with that filtration area will come down. Then proximal convoluted tubules also increase sodium absorption. These are the changes which will be brought about by angiotensin 2 in the kidney. Now let us see what is the neurohumoral regulation of renal function. So in case of hypertension, we have got enough stuff, enough ammunition till certain level. We have sympathoadrenal stimulation, tachycardia, blood pressure increase. Everywhere there is a vasoconstriction except vital organs. Most of the places vasoconstriction, all that. Then we have renin-angiotensin mechanism, what we have seen just now. And then we have aldosterone secretion. Aldosterone is secreted from the cortex, adrenal cortex, and from there absorption of sodium will increase, water absorption will increase. Arginine vasopressin, or what is called as a ADH antidiuretic hormone, that also is increased, and all this will result into, you can say, all this will result into decreased renal blood flow, decreased glomerular filtration, decreased urine flow, decreased sodium excretion, resulting in increasing the blood volume, increasing the pressure, all these things. Now let us see what happens if there is a hypertension. When the blood pressure is more, or hypervolemia, when you take a lot of water. So prostaglandins, kinins, atrial natriuretic peptides, these are the one, ANP, these are the ones which will be activated. The atrial stretch will bring in ANP release. So these will be stretched and these will be activated. When these are activated, then you have increased renal blood flow, increased GFR, increased urine flow. So the volume is, the kidney is trying to bring down the volume to the previous original level. That is what it is doing. So this is a very useful information for us, how kidney manages hyper as well as hypovolemia in both the situation. So now just go to the filtration area, glomerulus and Bowman's capsule. This is how you see most of the pictures. But I don't want you to remember this. For better understanding, you better remember it like this. It is a three-dimensional. It is not a two-dimensional thing. Okay, it is not like this. It is a three-dimensional structure. All around the capillaries, this Bowman's capsule is there. And you can see the capillaries, they are fenestrated, leaky kind of capillaries. And also, there is a space in the Bowman's capsule. This is glomerular or Bowman's space. And then you can see in the parietal layer, very thin continuous cells which won't allow anything to go out of it. But at the same time, on the visceral layer attached to the capillaries, you have podocytes which have got tentacles like things which will allow all the kind of things to go out or in, depending on the way it is required. Same thing, same kind of picture, enlarged, you can see these are the podocyte on the capillaries. You can see some of the, maybe here, you can see some of the holes through which these things are filtered. Okay, remember this picture where a cup going all around the capillaries. It is not one side, two-dimensional. Now let me make it two-dimensional and try to explain a little bit of glomerular filtration. So here you have a capillary endothelium, then you have a, I said in the previous picture, you can see it is a fenestrated. There are some gaps through which a lot of fluid goes in. Smaller things will go in, but larger things like RBCs won't go out. And also like plasma protein, specifically albumin, which is bigger, it won't go through this. So that will stay back. And then you have another layer, basement membrane. Interesting, this basement membrane is charged. It is negatively charged. So what it does is, it attracts all the positively charged substances, but it repels negatively charged substances. Very vital for us. Albumin and proteins are negatively charged. They are repelled. We don't want you here. But it says sodium you come, potassium you come. It attracts the positive ones. Chloride. You can ask me how chloride comes there, though it is negatively charged, because it's a very small, because it's a smaller against the, it's a electrical this one polarity, it will go along with sodium, because sodium and potassium are very thick friends, they go together. And then you have a podocytes, and there is a small nephrin. This is again a protein which again filters most of the smaller proteins and things like that. This is what, and then urine is formed in the glomerular space. Now let us look at the patient number 2. This is just, I am trying to break the monotony as well as trying to keep you thinking about something which is also patient related. 46-year-old man with bilateral ureteric calculi having hydronephrosis and increased creatinine level. So is it because of filtration problem? Is it any problem? So look at this same picture which I have projected earlier. Here if you look at it, the arterial pressure is same. I have not increased it. The oncotic pressure is also same. But hydrostatic pressure in the Bowman's capsule, which is acting against the filtration, which is saying don't come anymore, we are full. So that pressure is going up. So what is happening to the filtration pressure? It has fallen down. Sorry, the last part is saying increase 60%. No, it has fallen down. It is fallen down more than 60%. So that is the one which brings down the filtration. That's why creatinine will go up. They will have urinary retention. Sodium will go up. All those things in a bilateral renal calculi which is obstructing. Okay. Now let me summarize what I have told about. This is not the end of my talk. This is just a summary of the first part. Large blood flow related to their mass regulated for functional reason more than metabolic demand. We have seen that. The glomerular capillary pressure is determined by afferent and efferent arterioles. So both sides you have arterioles, they have got muscles. Imagine efferent is only veins, no muscle, they can't control, they can't contract rather. So this is both side arterioles. So it is a very good system where it can control both. Then glomerular filtration is resistant to macromolecules. You know, there is a gap is narrow and negatively charged, because if there is a membrane which is charged, GFR is determined by permeability and filtration pressure. Autoregulation keeps filtration pressure within limits. Now let us go to the tubule. What is happening? All this is filtered. Now what is happening to this? This is a very busy slide, because I am not going to individual part of filtration because that will take quite some time for me. But look at this busy area. That is the proximal tubule. You've got so much of load coming immediately following highway, small road, so much is coming, and how to handle that? So it is absorbing bicarbonate, sodium chloride, water, nutrients, including small proteins, potassium. Then it is throwing out little bit of hydrogen ion and ammonia. So ammonia also it is throwing out. This is what is happening in the proximal convoluted tubule. Then if you come to the descending loop, only water comes down mainly. Only water is going to come out of it. Then if you come to the medulla, if you see here, its water is also not coming. As it comes down, because water has already come out, the osmolarity is increasing, and then it becomes very hyperosmolar here, and then sodium chloride is reabsorption occur. This is a area where water cannot go in or out. Only sodium chloride is absorbed back into the system. So that is what happens in this area. Then you can see distal convoluted tubule where again water is absorbed, sodium chloride is absorbed, potassium is to some extent is excreted, sodium hydrogen ion is or proton is excreted, bicarbonate absorbed. This area forms one of the major area where potassium control occurs, where water control occurs. This as well as the area of the collecting ducts. These are the areas where it occurs. You can see the osmolarity of this area. Cortex is almost same as the, you can say the blood, 300. Whereas when it comes to outer medulla, it is about 400, it is coming near 600, 900. Imagine 1200. That is about 4 times the plasma osmolarity. So you can't imagine if this kind of 1200 osmolarity happens anywhere else, that tissues will not survive. But the medulla is special. That will survive in spite of this. That survives there because of some reason. Now transport across the tubules, what happens? Transcellular, often from the duct into the cell, then from the cell into the interstitium. Some may be active, some may be along the pressure gradient, osmotically along with another kind of molecule, or some may go paracellular reabsorption in between the cells. There are small gaps. Some of them might go through that also. These slides I am not going to spend much of time, but at the same time, you can see how busy is PCT pushing somebody out like and getting something like glucose in, and there are so many things happening. Water, carbon dioxide is going out, and depending on the balance, things are happening here. So this is a proximal convoluted tubule. And then this is again the summary of what is happening in the renal tubules. Okay, the sodium, potassium, chloride, everything is absorbed here. Water is absorbed back. Sodium chloride and potassium absorbed. I'm just trying to recollect and tell you again and again, because these are the important things. We should know where, what is happening, what we are losing, where and when. Okay, then calcium, magnesium, bicarbonate, potassium, everything is absorbed here. But remember, the absorption in PCT is much more than absorption that is occurring in DCT. A little bit is occurring, that's all. Not that much compared to the absorption occurring in the PCT. Now, our interest, what are the endogenous substances which are usually actively secreted in the PCT? Acetylcholine, creatinine, dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, histamine. These are endogenous. When it comes to drugs, morphine, pethidine, procaine, quinine, isoprenaline, atropine, these are the ones which are thrown out from the proximal convoluted tubule. Into. Then when it comes to organic anions, you have bile salts, fatty acids, oxalates, and prostaglandins. These are the ones which are usually thrown out. And then you have drugs like, these are the drugs, you can read that, furosemide, salicylate, sulfonamide. These are the ones which are again secreted in the proximal convoluted tubule. This is about the ascending loop. I won't stress much here due to the wanting of time. Then distal convoluted tubule, mostly what is happening here is sodium chloride going in, magnesium, calcium going in. Okay, going in, this red is nothing but it is a vessel. It is going into the blood from the lumen to the cell into the blood. That's what happened. There is some energy required in some areas. ATP is spent there, especially for the potassium. Okay, potassium going out, sodium is going in against the concentration gradient. Whenever it is occurring against the concentration gradient, it has to be either ATP energy or it has to go with the one more molecule which can take it along. Like often chloride does that along with sodium. Now this is in collecting duct. Again, a lot of water is being absorbed and some amount of urea is being excreted to maintain the hyperosmolarity of the renal medulla. Now filter load potassium. This is one of the important things, potassium for us, where it is absorbed, what it is happening. Site of action, 65% of the, when it is a normal diet, 65% reabsorbed from PCT, proximal convoluted tubule. There is no difference, even if it is a low potassium, it can't absorb much more. Thick ascending loop, again there is not much of difference between the two. But difference comes when it is DCT or CD. Collecting ducts or distal convoluted tubule, there secretions or throwing out can be 20 to 150%, whereas secretion very small or negligible amount when there is a low potassium. Cortical collecting duct, about again secretions, it remains almost similar. Medullary collecting duct, very little change. So urinary excretion can be 20 to 150% of the filtered 150%, because you can see here there is a lot of secretion occurring. There will be a large amount of potassium can be lost, or there is a very minimal negligible amount of potassium is lost. This is important for us to know why the potassium is one of the most important element. We'll be keep on touching upon that because this is vital for many of the tissue function also. Now again, this is a similar thing. You can say here bicarbonate and chloride exchange is occurring, and here chloride is going through the channels and potassium is coming. This is very interesting, where some of the potassium sparing drugs, some of the drugs which will work, whereas there is a exchange of chloride and sodium is occurring with potassium. Now let us see angiotensin 2 and hypokalemia will increase the potassium in the blood. Okay, that will increase the blood, decrease the secretion of potassium into the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct. That way increases. Whereas aldosterone, hyperkalemia, high sodium, GI hormones, and what we give often, the diuretics, these are the ones which will reduce the potassium, that will make more potassium to excrete in the urine. Yeah, now the key points is organic metabolites are reabsorbed completely and waste products are excreted. Normal glucose load completely reabsorbed in the hyperglycemia, transport saturate leading to glycosuria. We'll come to that little more because I'm interested in this glucose. Peptides reabsorbed by endocytosis after enzymatic degradation. Some organic solutes reabsorbed passively due to pH alteration. Sometimes bicarbonate, phosphate, depending on the pH alteration. Urea reabsorbed passively in the DCT, recycled between collecting duct and loop of Henle, keeping that area hyperosmolar. That is one of the important things. Most of the filter water is reabsorbed in the PCT and then also later in the distal convoluted tubule as well as in the collecting duct. Anions and osmotic content is linked directly to the active reabsorption of sodium. Most of the sodium, chloride, bicarbonate and filtered volume is reabsorbed. Isoosmolarity in the proximal tubule. The loop of Henle reabsorbs some of the water and even more sodium, thereby diluting the tubular fluid. I am talking about ascending loop. Descending loop is it's becoming more and more concentrated. Water goes out. Distal tubule continues to absorb more sodium without water. So considering diluting the segment, this is considered as a diluting segment. Reabsorption in distal part of distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct is variable. It's highly dependent on two of the enzymes, ADH and aldosterone. And AVP, that is what is called as earlier ADH, will influence a lot whether hypoosmolar fluid is excreted in large volume or get reabsorbed. Can recall here diabetes insipidus. Now diuretics and their action quickly. So mannitol, this is the one which we give in every neuro case. As I was telling, Venkatesh would have given several grams or maybe kgs of mannitol. Yes, kgs, not grams. Kgs we give every, grams we give every patient. So this is filtered through the glomerular filtration. And then this is interesting. It is not absorbed by the PCT. So it holds water along with it. It hugs the water, it takes water along with it. And that's how diuresis is brought about. So along with that, there is an increased excretion of sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and like chloride and bicarbonate also. So you can see these kind of electrolyte abnormalities when you give large amount of mannitol. Now let us see loop diuretics, one of the favorites. Often we give. These will go and work near the ascending loop. Okay, they will sodium chloride and potassium absorption. They will be preventing that sodium chloride absorption, and they will potassium absorption also. They will prevent, and with that large amount of sodium, chloride, and potassium is lost. Along with that, calcium and magnesium is also lost in these cases of a loop diuretics. Now coming to the thiazide diuretics, they act on the distal convoluted tubules. There they will decrease the potassium, magnesium and calcium level. Basically, sodium and chloride transfer that is occurring there, that is the one which is inhibited by these thiazide diuretics. And with that, they will also throw out a lot of potassium, magnesium, calcium, but they increase urea absorption. Problem is, this can produce gout. So you should remember that thiazide diuretics, long time user, can increase urea and can produce gout. Now potassium sparing diuretics, spironolactone, all those things which we'll be using, they usually what they do is they will prevent sodium chloride along with potassium excretion. They will reduce the potassium excretion both in the distal convoluted tubule as well as the collecting duct, and by that they will maintain they are called as a potassium sparing diuretics. Now let us see a case, 45-year-old man with sugar of 450 milligram per deciliter, scheduled for wound debridement. Not very uncommon. We see quite often, and because it is a debridement, we have to do quickly also. Now what is this? Patient is having problem. Let us see how the kidney is handling glucose. You can see glucose often it goes with sodium. It is absorbed inside the cell and from there to the blood. This happens in the proximal convoluted tubule itself. Most of the glucose is absorbed either with the 2 sodium atoms or with, sorry, I am talking about sodium or 1 sodium atom. So it will be transported across into the blood. because glucose is decided, the tubules decide this is a very precious element, we can take it inside with sodium. So that's how glucose has been treated. But then sometimes body treats glucose differently. Glucose level keeps on going up. And then kidney says, this is the time, let me decide, we will not absorb much more glucose. This is again a protective mechanism. And then how does it happen? That is also very interesting. Glucose absorption has got two things, which I have told you in the previous slide. Here, a high kind of capacity, low kind of affinity system which absorbs in the early proximal convoluted tubule. So that absorbs most of it. It has got enormous capacity, but affinity is little low. So very few are remaining, it might leave it. And then you have one more system which absorbs, which takes up whatever is remaining. It is like a scavenging system. It will take out whatever is remaining little also. High affinity, but it has got its limitation. It can't carry everything. That's why at this point, you have a glucose going up further. Then you can see slowly that second transport system, it says I'm saturated, I can't do any more. It gives the warning. Then after that, whatever increase in the sugar will go out in the urine, it won't go out. It will also, it can't reabsorb. So it will go out in the urine. You will see 3+, 4+, Brickrid of urine, all those kind of things. So that is what is happening, because the transporter which takes it inside, the second one, is having little problem, is saturated, is tired. Now kidney handling of the acid loss. I'm not going to go in detail of this because this is little, it will be acid-base balance, little bit will be covered probably, or else also this is not very, if I cover this, it will become little more. So what I'll do is, I'll just give you the salient points. Fixed acid base enter blood by body by GI, metabolism, IV or renal processes. Kidney recovers most of the filtered bicarbonate. It tries to recover most of it. By that, it maintains the, or it prevents the acidosis. And the kidney excrete acid by attaching secreted hydrogen ions to filtered synthesized urinary bases like phosphate. So it pushes hydrogen ion out. By that, absorption of bicarbonate and pushing out hydrogen ion, it will try to maintain low, like it will try to create or control the pH. A large fraction of acid load is excreted by converting glutamine bicarbonate and ammonium. They excreted the ammonium and returning the bicarbonate to the blood. Several forms of renal tubular acidosis result in inability to secrete enough hydrogen ions to match the normal input. Remember, kidney is the one which brings back the pH. This is a very strong acting, but it requires time. It's not very quick. It will take some time. Respiratory is quick, renal is complete or near complete. Okay. I think almost my time is over. I will not go further. Kidney has got a lot of wonders to tell, and I'll stop at this point. So what we have discussed is about renal blood flow, uniqueness of renal vasculature, the autoregulation, and the fascinating beauty of autoregulation and maintaining the GFR. Then tubular reabsorption secretions, handling of sugar, the glucose, what I mean, potassium, hydrogen ion, and action of diuretics, how it happens, which diuretics act where and what it happens. So we have seen these things in the last few, almost like 40 minutes. And then thank you all. I will be available for the Q&A session. And I thank my family. Actually, my daughter drew most of the pictures which are there in my slides. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for this succinct description of an intricate subject for our audience. We will now proceed to the